Sunlight slid through the sweet curtains and turned my veil into a pale flame. I watched myself breathe in the mirror. Practiced calm, practiced joy. Hailey Carter, 31, wildlife veterinarian, single mom, bride. The mascara held, but my eyes looked like they belonged elsewhere, as if my life had left. Downstairs, guests gathered for the perfect rooftop ceremony at the Rainier Grand Hotel. Cameras ready, smiles polished. Everyone adored Grant Holloway, the careful lawyer who never raised his voice. I respected him. Lily loved him. Respect and love are not the same thing. I learned when the ring was armor. In my overnight bag hidden under stockings I would never wear again, a pregnancy test sat like a confession. 8 weeks. IVF, clinical and planned, because Grant feared passing on his family's condition. I told myself it was responsible. Still, my palm kept drifting to my flat belly all morning. My mom, June Carter, had cried when she saw the dress, convinced this day meant my storms were over. I let her believe it, because she had raised Lily and me through my worst years. I had promised her peace. A rooftop garden seemed like peace, high above my fears. When the doors opened, the wind carried a hint of salt from Elliott Bay and lifted the roses in my hands. Seattle glittered beyond the glass railing. Cranes and water and sky. I walked alone, by choice, because I needed one small decision that was mine before I signed anything. Grant waited under the arch, blonde hair perfect, shoulders squared like a man closing a deal. People called it love because it looked steady. They did not see the quiet bargains behind my smile, or the way Lily's future sat on my tongue, unspoken, heavy like I could swallow it. The officiant's voice blurred into tradition, and my heartbeat did the counting. Then the question came, the one everyone laughs about in movies, and the air answered first. Engines roared below. Tires bit the service drive. A black SUV slid into view like a threat made metal, and kept coming. More followed. 2, 3, maybe 4, all glossy and identical, cutting across the manicured path. Guests turned into a flock, scattering, hands over mouths, phones raised anyway. Men in dark suits stepped out with the calm of soldiers. They formed a corridor without speaking, and suddenly the rooftop felt smaller. Then he appeared, taller than the men around him, dark hair swept back, face too still to be friendly. A thin scar cut one eyebrow, like a reminder to never get comfortable. His suit was charcoal, expensive, and he moved as if the space belonged to him already, including me. His eyes locked on mine with a certainty that made my skin prickle. I realized he knew my name before anyone introduced him. Nico Marino. The name hit the crowd like a dropped glass. He declared, for everyone to hear, that the baby I carried was his, not Grant's today. For a second I waited for my brain to correct the sentence, to label it prank, delusion, anything. I had never met him. My pregnancy had been paperwork and rooms and a donor profile, nothing more. Yet my body reacted as if it recognized him. Fear first, then something nameless. Grant's hand tightened on mine, a reflex of ownership more than comfort, and I hated myself for noticing. June made a sound behind me that I felt in my ribs. Guests whispered in waves, half terrified. I stood between two lives, one orderly, one impossible, and neither asked my permission. Hotel security rushed forward and then slowed, as if the air itself warned them. Nico's men did not shout or fidget. Their stillness felt like they were waiting for a second act they'd already seen. I tasted metal on my tongue. My bouquet trembled, petals brushing my wrists like hands. He didn't look at Grant when he spoke. He looked at me, as if my body was a contract he'd already signed. Somewhere in the words, I heard Evergreen Fertility Center, heard dates, heard my secret turned inside out. My knees wanted to fold. I stayed upright from stubbornness alone. I tried to focus on Lily's face, the one I'd seen earlier holding June's hand, twirling in her little dress. She was supposed to toss petals, laugh, eat cake. My throat tightened because I could not see her now. The rooftop crowd became a blur of strangers with open mouths. The first crack split the air. I thought firework, until screams rose and people dropped. Another crack followed, then a burst that made the railing vibrate. The garden changed shape as guests crawled for cover. Grant tugged my arm. My feet froze. Nico moved and his men formed a wall. My hands flew to my stomach, guilt punching hard. I had planned this baby as a surprise, not as proof in public. The veil snapped in the wind. A chair toppled. I heard June somewhere behind me. Not words, just raw fear, and still I could not find Lily anywhere. Nico grabbed my wrist and pulled. It hurt, and I still moved, because staying meant dying. My heel sank into the lawn. The bouquet fell. The noise became water in my ears. I turned once, desperate for Lily, and saw only bodies, tables, and June's pale face searching the crowd. The SUV door gaped open, dark against the bright sky. Men closed in, guiding me like a package. Another crack snapped nearby. I moved because my lungs demanded it. Then the truth landed. Lily wasn't with me. My arms were empty. I had been taken, and my panic was beginning. Cold air slapped my face as I stumbled into the open SUV. The world behind me was all shouting, scrambling feet, and the sharp pop of shots that didn't sound like movie blanks. Someone yanked my veil free before it could snag, and the door slammed, sealing me in a dark leather cave. The vehicle lurched forward. Through tinted glass, I caught a fractured glimpse of the rooftop. White chairs toppled, rose petals spinning, my mother's pale dress pressed to the ground. I twisted, searching for Lily's small red bow. I saw nothing. My lungs forgot how to work briefly. Nico sat beside me, not touching, but taking up space the way storm clouds take up a whole sky. He barked orders to his men without raising his voice, and the calm in him felt more frightening than panic. I tried to unbuckle, to throw myself back out, but the car swerved and my shoulder hit the door. My stomach clenched, and I curled my arm over it, protecting a secret nobody was supposed to know yet. Nico glanced at that motion, then at the mirror, then forward again, as if tracking invisible threats. The city swallowed us at once. Everything in me screamed Lily. I pictured her under a table, hands over her ears, waiting for me like she always did when thunder shook our apartment windows. Grant blurred through my mind too, his stunned face, his life cracking. I hated myself for the way relief flickered when I realized he was the kind of man who could call the police, file paperwork, fight in court. None of that would bring my daughter back if she was taken. The thought of her being used as leverage made bile rise. I pressed my forehead to the glass and counted breaths. Seattle flashed by in pieces, neon reflections on pavement, the curve of the waterfront, a ferry horn somewhere in the distance. My mind kept rewriting the last hour, looking for the moment I could have grabbed Lily and run, looking for the second I should have said no to this wedding, no to the careful life I chose because I was tired of being afraid. I had promised Lily a home where no one screamed. Instead, I had brought her to a rooftop war. I wanted to claw at Nico, to demand he stop, but fear made me stay still. At some point, the adrenaline burned out and left me hollow. I remember a tunnel of streetlights, then darkness, then the soft hum of an engine that wasn't moving. When I opened my eyes, morning light fell across a room too elegant to be real. Cream walls, heavy drapes, a chandelier with old glass drops that glittered like frozen rain. My wedding dress lay crumpled on a chair, stained at the hem, smelling faintly of smoke. I checked my body first, the way every woman learns to do, and found my slip untouched. Relief hit, then anger, sharp as needles. I tried the handle anyway. Like denial could change metal. The latch didn't budge. The window wouldn't open either, and the glass felt thicker than any hotel pane I'd ever cleaned paw prints off after rescues. Outside, manicured hedges framed a stretch of water, calm enough to mock me. A man in a dark suit walked the perimeter below, speaking into something at his ear. Security, prison guards, whatever name made me feel less insane. I pressed both hands to my belly, still flat, and whispered apologies to a baby conceived in a clinic and trapped in a stranger's fortress. A soft knock, then the lock clicked, and I spun around. A woman entered with a tray, hair pinned back, eyes steady. She set toast, fruit, and coffee on the dresser, and pointed out the bathroom. Then she nodded at the closet. When I opened it, my breath caught. Clothes sat folded in my exact size, even sneakers like the ones I wore to the wildlife center. I didn't feel cared for. I felt catalogued. The woman left without waiting for my response, and the lock slid home like a verdict. Somewhere downstairs, a creak reminded me I was watched. I paced until my legs burned, then froze when Mrs. Delgado returned with an envelope. Inside was a photo. Lily on June's couch, rabbit in her arms, cheeks blotchy, eyes open. Relief hit fierce enough to hurt. Under the photo, a single page explained the rule I'd dreaded. Lily was safe with my mother in a protected place, but I could not contact them. No calls, no texts, no messages through friends. Any signal could be traced, and if it led to Lily, I would never forgive myself. My mind understood. My heart rebelled. I held the photo like air. By afternoon, hunger and shock left me lightheaded, and I rang the bell. A guard appeared and guided me down a staircase that smelled of lemon polish. The mansion looked perfect, but it felt staged, like nobody was meant to relax here. He stopped at double doors and opened them. Nico stood behind a desk in a library lined with books and windows. On the desk lay photographs, sorted. Not wedding pictures. Surveillance. Me outside the wildlife center, me at a grocery store, then my breath stopped. Lily at school pickup, her red bow visible, a circle inked around her. Every photograph on Nico's desk felt like a hand on my throat. Me stepping out of my clinic in Ballard, hair twisted up, coffee in one hand, keys in the other. Me at the grocery store, scanning shelves for Lily's favorite cereal. Me at the crosswalk outside her school, head turned as if I could sense the lens. The worst ones were the ones I hadn't noticed while living them, the angles that proved someone had watched us long enough to learn our rhythm. My skin crawled. I wanted to slam the pictures to the floor, to shout for a judge, for Grant, for the police, for anyone whose world still ran on rules. But my hands just hovered, shaking. I kept seeing that red circle around Lily's bow, a mark that made my stomach clench like I'd swallowed glass. Nico didn't rush me. He stood behind the desk like a wall, heavy and still, letting my panic burn itself out into something sharper. He slid a second set of pages forward, neatly clipped, dates and times printed in plain black ink. I understood enough to see the pattern. 3 weeks of following, then the wedding, then the plan to make me disappear somewhere quiet, somewhere with no cameras and too many exits. My honeymoon suitcase flashed through my mind, the one with the hidden test, the tiny celebration I'd promised myself. The idea that someone had been waiting for that moment made my mouth go dry. My thoughts spun through old memories and found the ones I'd dismissed. The sedan that seemed to glide behind me on the freeway. The man at the coffee shop who never ordered. The way Lily had once asked why the same car kept parking near our building. I had laughed and told her it was nothing. Now I felt sick at how easy it had been to miss. Because I was tired. Because I was trying to be normal. Because I believed a clinic and a courthouse and a wedding contract could keep danger out. Nico moved again, and the air tightened. He placed a folder in front of me with Evergreen Fertility Center on the header. The kind of clean branding that promised safety and science. Inside were forms with my name, my signatures, my appointment dates. Beneath them was a lab report. I recognized the way you recognize your own handwriting, even when you wish you didn't. It stated paternity with a probability so high it looked unreal. My vision blurred anyway. I had come to that clinic wanting a baby I could give Lily a sibling, a home that felt complete. Grant had framed it as the responsible path, and I had agreed because I was so hungry for stable ground. My mind tried to reject the conclusion. I had never met Nico Marino before today. I had never chosen him. I had chosen a donor profile, a list of traits, a quiet, anonymous kindness. Nico's presence in my body felt impossible, like a lie written into my blood. Then Nico laid out the last piece, and my resistance cracked. Another document, older, showed his genetic material stored at the same clinic years earlier, likely as insurance for a man who lived with risk. He had not brought me romance or fate. He had brought logistics. The clinic had access. Someone with power had used it. In my head, I watched gloved hands switching labels, not by accident, but with intention, because a baby could become a leash. I thought about Dr. Kreshnik's soft voice, the reassuring smile I had trusted, and my anger turned icy. I felt heat rise to my face. But it wasn't shame, it was fury. I refused the idea that this child made me property. I refused the idea that my pregnancy was a bargaining chip. My baby was not a weapon, not a hostage, not a bridge between men with guns and money. My baby was a life, and I had already started building a place for that life beside Lily's bed. A second toothbrush in the cup, a second laugh in our kitchen. Nico's gaze dropped to my stomach for a second, then lifted again. I read something in his expression that sounded like regret. Not for me, but for the fact that a child existed in his world at all. He did not pretend to be clean. I understood, from the way his men moved and the way this house locked, that he lived outside the law. But I also understood his line, the one he repeated without needing to say it twice. He didn't hunt civilians, and he didn't use children as tools. That was why he had crashed my wedding instead of letting strangers take me later. That was why Lily was with June instead of in a van headed somewhere I would never find. My breathing steadied. Not because I forgave him, but because I finally saw the true shape of the monster. It wasn't the man in front of me. It was the polished clinic and the smiling doctor and the hidden network that had looked at my motherhood and decided I was easy. Yet the lock was real, and so was the distance to Lily. Before I could breathe, glass shattered downstairs, voices rose, and a crisp crack snapped the night. Nico turned, and the house answered. The mansion went quiet after Nico's folder closed, but my mind stayed loud. I lay on the bed fully dressed, staring at the ceiling, replaying Lily's circled bow, the clinic logo, the clean printed dates. Outside, Bainbridge water breathed against the shore, and somewhere far off a fairy horn sounded like a warning. I pressed my palm to my belly and tried to imagine this baby as only mine, only a future sibling for Lily, not a message men sent each other. Sleep would not come. I kept listening for footsteps that were not ours. Even the lampshade seemed afraid. Near 2 a.m, a sharp crack snapped the stillness. Glass, I realized, followed by a muffled shout and the rush of feet in the hall. My body moved before my brain did. I searched the room for anything solid, grabbed the heavy desk chair, and backed into the corner farthest from the window. My throat tightened so hard it hurt. I thought of Lily hiding under June's dining table, of the baby inside me, and I promised both of them I would not freeze. Another crash came closer, then the house answered with running voices outside my door. The lock clicked and Nico burst in as if he had been carved out of the dark. His shirt was smeared with blood that did not match the steady way he breathed. His eyes swept the room, found me with the chair raised, and I felt ridiculous and terrified at once. He crossed in 3 strides, caught my wrist, and pulled me into the hallway. Guards appeared like shadows, faces hard, hands empty until they needed to be otherwise. Nico steered me to a door I had thought was a closet, then swung it open to a stairwell dropping underground. The stairs were concrete and cold beneath my bare feet. We descended fast, my dress tangled around my legs, my breath loud in my ears. At the bottom, a thick metal door opened into a room the size of an office, lined with monitors and cables. Camera feeds showed the gardens, the driveway, the kitchen, the balcony. Shapes moved across the grass, figures sliding between hedges. Somewhere above, another crack echoed, then a thud that shook dust from the ceiling. I sat on a bench, arms wrapped around my belly, watching strangers try to reach us through glass and stone. Time stretched in that room, elastic and cruel. Radios hissed, footsteps pounded above. The ocean outside kept breathing as if nothing mattered. Every sound made me see Lily's bow, and guilt gnawed at me like hunger. Nico watched the screens once, then adjusted his jacket with quiet focus, like a man stepping into bad weather. For a heartbeat, his eyes met mine, and I felt a strange mix of warning and restraint. Then he turned and climbed the stairs again, leaving me behind with a guard, a locked door, and my own shaking hands. I listened, still, waiting for him. Eventually the cracks stopped. Silence fell so suddenly it felt like a trick. The guard's shoulders eased by a fraction, and only then did my body start to shake. I needed air, needed sky, needed proof I was not buried alive. When the door opened, I followed Nico up into a house that smelled of smoke and cleaning chemicals. He guided me away from the windows and out onto the stone patio. Dawn was lifting over the water, pale pink and gold, indifferent to the violence. I sank to the cold stones, trembling, and tried to breathe past the nausea. Nico sat down a few feet away, not close enough to claim me, not far enough to abandon me. The horizon brightened, and birds began to argue in the trees as if this were an ordinary morning. I watched his hands, scarred and steady, and wondered how many dawns he had spent like this, counting losses he could not grieve out loud. His face looked older than it had at my wedding, carved by responsibility rather than age. I hated him for the lock on my door, but I could not deny the math. Without him, I would be gone. Men in coveralls arrived at dawn, moving through the garden. They wiped footprints, gathered broken glass, and spoke in low voices that refused to become my business. Nico stayed beside me until my shaking slowed, then stood, scanning the property as if peace could be measured. I followed him back inside, stepping around a rug that hid stains I did not want to name. In the hallway he paused, and I felt the shift in his body before I understood it. This place was no longer safe. The attackers had tested the perimeter, learned patterns, and confirmed we were here. Nico's decision came with certainty. We were leaving now, before sunrise, before anyone could return. Exhaustion flared into anger, because his protection meant motion and no real rest. I went upstairs, changed out of my dress, and the closet of my clothes felt like proof I had been planned for. When I returned, bags waited by the door and engines rumbled outside. As the convoy pulled away, Bainbridge slipped behind us like a dream. I realized the next place would be another cage, only higher and brighter, and I had to negotiate for Lily, medical care, and purpose starting today. The elevator rose so smoothly it felt like lying. One minute I was in a convoy that smelled of wet wool and gunpowder. The next I stepped into a penthouse of steel, glass, and quiet. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed Elliott Bay like a postcard, water broken by ferries and cranes. The air carried a faint salt bite even this high. Every surface shone, as if fear could be polished away. Two men waited by the entry, hands folded, eyes scanning. I understood the rule instantly. Beautiful meant controlled. My stomach tightened, because cages look best when they sparkle inside. I had wasted days fighting locks on Bainbridge, testing windows, hoping for a miracle exit. After the siege, miracles felt childish. I needed plans, not tantrums. In the kitchen, a bowl of fruit sat beside a stack of phone blockers and keycards, proof that even breakfast was security. Nico moved through the space like an owner inspecting a shipment, not a man building a home. I watched him from the counter and rehearsed what I would demand. Not freedom. Not yet. Just the things a mother needs to keep breathing. First, Lily. Second, a doctor. Third, work that matters today. I asked for confirmation that Lily was safe with June, and I did it with my voice steady, because shaking would make him think he could postpone it. He produced a sealed envelope instead of a phone, and I hated the power in that gesture. Inside was a new photo of Lily at my mom's table, tongue out in concentration, coloring a turtle. June had written a note in the margin saying she was fine. She missed me. She was brave. Relief hit so hard my eyes burned. Then the cruelty followed. No calls, no texts, nothing traceable for now. My second demand was prenatal care that didn't depend on luck. Nico nodded once, then handed me a folder with Dr. Lauren Foster's credentials, reviews, and a schedule already set. He had turned one of the spare rooms into a medical suite, like he was outfitting a ship for a storm. Part of me felt grateful, because I knew what stress could do to a pregnancy. Another part raged that I needed his permission to see a doctor. The appointment was at 2 p.m. the next day. Control, delivered as kindness, still tasted like control. I signed consent forms, silently. Dr. Foster arrived with a calm smile that didn't match the guards at my door. She spoke to me like I was a patient, not a possession, and that alone nearly made me cry. Her hands were warm, her questions practical, and she didn't flinch at the strange setup. She took my blood pressure twice, frowned, then softened, telling me it was elevated but manageable. I told her I slept in short bursts and woke to footsteps, and she looked at Nico with a sharp private understanding. He stayed near the window, silent, letting her work without interference at all. When she turned on the ultrasound, the screen flickered into gray shapes that meant nothing until she adjusted the angle. At 12 weeks, the tiny form appeared, all head and possibility, and my breath snagged. The heartbeat filled the room, fast and steady, like an engine refusing to stall. I laughed once, then covered my mouth because tears came. This wasn't leverage on paper. This was a person growing inside me, stubbornly alive. I thought of Lily's drawing of the turtle and felt my chest crack open. I had wanted this baby for peace, not war, yet here we were. Nico had moved closer without my noticing. In the reflection of the screen, his face looked stripped down, the hard edges softened by something like dread. He stared as if he could memorize the heartbeat and use it as armor later. I realized he hadn't expected to feel anything, and that scared him more than bullets. He kept his hands to himself, but his shoulders were tense, and his jaw worked like he was swallowing words. Dr. Foster printed a photo and handed it to me, and Nico's gaze tracked it, helpless. This target was tiny, and ours right then. Back in the living room, the skyline looked unchanged, and that made me resent it. I thought of Grant's tidy condo and his belief that schedules could keep danger out. I chose that life because Lily deserved predictability. Now predictability felt like a costume burned off in one violent afternoon. Safety was no longer quiet. Safety was layers, locked elevators, and eyes on every door. Nico understood threat the way I understood frightened animals, and I hated admitting the similarity. The longer I sat still, the more panic crept in. I needed work, purpose, something that proved I was Hailey. That evening, Nico returned from a call and set a tablet on the table, his face back to business. He intended to recover evidence from Evergreen Fertility Center, enough to expose the network and force action. He needed my knowledge of the building, the routes I walked as a patient. I felt the pull of it, the chance to strike at the original betrayal. I also felt fear, because saying yes would knot me tighter to his world. I stared at Lily's turtle drawing and understood my choice. If I helped, I would set a boundary. No innocent people harmed. By the second night in the penthouse, the bay looked calm enough to forgive anything. Nico spread a thin folder across the table, not like a lover offering hope, but like a commander laying out weather reports. Evergreen Fertility Center, he implied, was the storm's source, with my name inside. I understood what he wanted. A targeted information recovery, proof solid enough to burn the clinic's mask and shrink the target on my back. Helping him meant stepping onto his side of the line. Refusing meant leaving other women's files untouched, other babies weaponized, other mothers blamed in quiet rooms. I sat with my palms flat on the glass tabletop and rehearsed the only power I still owned. If I was going to be useful, I would not become cruel. No harm to innocents, not the night guard, not the janitor, not the receptionist, not a patient, not even once. Nico listened without interrupting, his face unreadable, as if he was weighing the cost of my conscience. Then he gave a single nod that felt like ink drying. I sensed he respected clear boundaries because promises were leverage too, and broken promises invited chaos in a world already full enough. After that, my role became memory. I sketched the clinic from the inside of my head. The bright waiting room that smelled like citrus cleaner, the corridor with framed baby photos, the records office tucked behind frosted glass, the staff door near billing where I always signed forms silently alone. Each line I drew felt like betrayal and therapy at the same time. I kept thinking of Lily's turtle drawing, of June's careful handwriting, and of the heartbeat I'd heard that afternoon. This wasn't about revenge. It was about preventing a repeat so my children could grow without shadows following. On the night they went, I stayed in the penthouse with a headset and a glass of water I never drank. I heard footsteps, quiet radio static, and Nico's breathing slowed to a steady rhythm. My own pulse refused to cooperate. I pressed a hand to my belly and waited anyway. I kept picturing Lily asleep at June's house, one arm thrown over her rabbit, trusting that her mom would come home. I pictured the baby inside me, too small to understand danger but already surrounded by it. Every sound in my ear became a question. Are they safe right now? When Nico asked for confirmation, I guided him by landmarks only I remembered. The way you guide someone through fog by describing the shape of trees. I named the turn after the photo wall, the door with the chipped handle, the office where forms were stored. My voice stayed low. Then a new set of footsteps appeared on the feed. Heavier, unhurried, the kind that meant someone doing routine rounds. My throat tightened. If Nico reacted with force, my deal would die on the spot. I reminded him of my line, and he slowed his team into stillness until past. The seconds stretched until I could hear my own blood rushing. The staff member moved past without noticing, humming faintly, ordinary life brushing the edge of our nightmare. I didn't celebrate. I just exhaled, because we had kept a stranger from becoming collateral. That mattered more than speed to me. After that, the audio changed, a flurry of movement, then the tone of success. They had what they came for. Files copied, logs preserved, names and dates gathered like evidence in a jar. Nico's breathing eased. My hands started shaking anyway. Reaction, as if my body waited to feel fear. When Nico returned, he didn't act triumphant. He set his jacket on a chair with careful precision and looked at me like he was checking for cracks. He had honored my condition in the only way that mattered, by doing it. Respect showed in the space he gave me afterward. I didn't feel heroic. I felt stained by proximity to his world, even from a penthouse couch. But I also felt something new, a thin thread of agency, because I had protected strangers with nothing but a boundary. I thought of my patients, wild animals calmed by firm, gentle hands. Later, Eli brought up the first batch of recovered files, and the screen filled with spreadsheets that made my stomach drop. Not one switch, not one mistake, but dozens, stretching back years. Each entry was a couple's hope turned into a trap. Judges, executives, officials, names I recognized from headlines. I stared at the list and felt my anger change shape. This wasn't only about Nico's enemies. It was a clinic selling bodies and futures to anyone who paid. My case was the one that intersected with Nico's stored sample. That overlap had saved me, and doomed me at once. Nico watched my face and saw my fear harden into purpose. The files pointed to one signature I recognized from my forms, the doctor who had smiled and stolen my future. Dr. Arbin Kreshnik sat at the center. Nico's jaw tightened, and I knew he would go for him next. I sat back, exhausted, and realized the clinic had touched more lives than I could picture. Somewhere, other mothers were still trusting those halls, still signing those papers, still believing science meant safety. I couldn't unsee the list. Whatever Nico did next, I needed to see it with my own eyes. Outside the windows, Seattle glittered like nothing had changed, but my world had. Nico began making calls that tightened the air. I held the ultrasound photo and thought of Lily's bow circled in red. If Dr. Kreshnik was the key, then tomorrow would open a door I couldn't close again. By morning, the recovered files sat on my tablet like a sickness. Rows of dates, initials, donor codes, and silent notes about switches that were never supposed to happen. Not one mistake, but patterns, repeating for years, crossing states, touching people with titles I recognized from local news. I scrolled until my vision blurred, then pressed my fingers to my lips to keep from gagging. I kept thinking of women walking into Evergreen Fertility Center with hopeful folders, believing the clean walls meant safety. I had been one of them. Now I understood I was not unlucky. I was selected, and my daughter's name sat in head like a siren. Nico moved through the penthouse with his phone low, arranging what he called a clean handoff to a federal contact. I never asked for her name. I only heard the way his tone sharpened when he spoke about warrants and timing. Yet even as he set that in motion, he kept circling one decision. He wanted Dr. Arbin Kreshnik in his hands first. Not forever, just long enough to strip out information about who paid for the switches and where Ilir Kreshnik was hiding now. I watched him pin that plan to the wall like a map. Every instinct in me said stay away. Still, I didn't want revenge. Revenge felt too small for what he had done. I wanted my dignity back, the piece that disappeared the moment a doctor decided I was a convenient container. So I told Nico I needed to see Arbin with my own eyes, to make him understand Lily had a mother and this baby had a life, not a price tag. Nico resisted in the only way he knew, by trying to lock me behind safety. I pushed back until he compromised. I would stay behind protection, inside a secure vehicle, wearing a vest, and leave the second risk rose. No more arguing. We drove at night along the industrial edge of Seattle, where the air smelled like salt and diesel and nobody asked questions. I sat behind tinted glass, fingers laced over my belly, watching Nico's men move with practiced quiet outside. Inside my chest, anger and fear took turns steering. When they brought Arbin into view, a single light bleached the color from his face. He looked smaller than he had in the clinic, without the white coat and the warm tone he used to sell trust. His eyes searched for control, then landed on me, and he blinked like a man who finally understood the human cost. I refused blinking. The truth came from him in pieces I didn't want, but needed. The switch had been deliberate, arranged through cousins and favors, because Nico's sample was valuable, and a child would be leverage. Arbin admitted I fit their profile. Single mom, exhausted, grateful for professionalism, unlikely to demand details, easy to isolate under the promise of a honeymoon. He described the plan with the same clinical calm he used for appointment notes. They would keep me until the baby was born, use that newborn as a rope around Nico's throat, then erase me because I knew too much. My vision tunneled, and bile rose hard. I centered myself on Lily's face, on June's hands braiding her hair, on the heartbeat that refused to slow, and I forced my voice to stay level inside my head. Whatever else I felt, I needed Arbin to talk. Under pressure, he gave up what he knew about Ilir. A waterfront compound that changed crews weekly, a rotating safe apartment near the port, and intermediaries who moved messages through legitimate businesses. Hearing it, I understood the clinic was only one doorway into a larger war, and my pregnancy had been chosen as the key. Nico absorbed every detail with cold focus that frightened me, and it left no mercy anywhere. Arbin tried to frame the whole thing as business, as if money could bleach blood from paperwork. That excuse hit me harder than his confession, because it meant he had never been angry, only calculating. I felt my disgust settle into my bones. I refused to give him the comfort of forgiveness, even in silence. Nico did not offer him comfort either. For all Nico's crimes, I had watched him draw a line around children and civilians, and he had kept it. Arbin wore legitimacy like a costume, and used it to harvest lives. That was worse. When I looked away, I felt skin tighten. They took Arbin out of the light and into a waiting vehicle, and I understood he would face charges soon, not Nico's justice. My legs trembled as I climbed back into the SUV, as if my body had stored fear for months and finally spent it. Nico sat beside me, silent, eyes fixed ahead, already thinking about what Ilir would do when he learned the clinic was exposed. Back at the penthouse, guards appeared, doors checked, phones banned. I held the ultrasound photo to my chest and knew retaliation was coming, bigger, and it would not care who stood nearby. Morning in the penthouse almost felt borrowed. I logged into a zoo consult, studied x-rays, and pretended the bay outside was just scenery. June's latest note arrived through Nico's secure channel. Lily had lost another tooth and taped it to the fridge like a trophy. I pressed the paper to my chest until my breathing slowed. Then, as if my body wanted to remind me why I had to stay calm, the baby rolled inside me, a soft flutter that made me pause mid-sentence. For 5 minutes, life looked normal enough to trust. It was a sweet lie. The lie shattered with a roar that seemed to come from beneath my feet. The floor bucked. A deep vibration ran up my legs and rattled my teeth. Glass chimed somewhere down the hall. Then alarms screamed, harsh and endless. I clutched my belly with both hands and sank to my knees, waiting for pain that never came. Only shock. The air tasted like dust. Doors opened, people yelling in the corridor, footsteps pounding toward the stairwell. My laptop slid off the table and cracked. I remember thinking, absurdly, that I still owed a client an email. Right then, too, Nico was in the doorway before my brain could finish panicking. His face had gone blank in the way predators go blank, all focus and no softness. He checked me first, eyes flicking to my stomach, then to the windows, then to the hall. He moved fast, guiding me upright, steering me away from the glass wall that looked suddenly fragile. I followed because my body recognized command, even when my mind hated it. In the corridor, neighbors stumbled out in pajamas, crying, clutching pets. Nico's men flowed around us like a shield, and I realized he had expected this. We pushed toward the service elevator, past a concierge trying to herd people away from the lobby. The alarm's wail layered with sirens outside, making the building feel like it was swallowing sound. In the cramped elevator, I kept one hand over my belly and the other braced against the wall, counting breaths the way Dr. Foster taught me. When the doors opened to the garage level, heat rushed in, followed by a second blast. It hit closer, a punch that sent everyone stumbling. Concrete dust drifted like snow. Someone screamed a name I couldn't catch, and I tasted terror. Nico pushed me into the back seat of an SUV that waited with its engine humming. The door shut, and the outside turned into flashing lights and running feet. We burst from the garage as sirens multiplied, and I saw residents pinned to the sidewalk, faces gray, hands over mouths. My body shook hard enough to make the seatbelt bite. I kept thinking about the old man in our elevator who always held the door, and the barista who remembered my order. I was escaping while lives cracked open behind us. Survival felt necessary, and still it tasted like guilt. As we cut through downtown, I understood the logic. Iller was not chasing me because I was special. He was chasing Nico, and I happened to be the softest place to press. The bombing wasn't aimed at my heart. It was aimed at Nico's name, and anyone near him was disposable. That included the receptionist downstairs, the families in other units, the dog walker in the lobby. The thought made my stomach twist harder than morning sickness. I wasn't trapped in a romance. I was trapped in a war, and my children were the reason I had to survive it. We reached Bainbridge before my hands stopped trembling. The mansion rose behind new gates, brighter lights, more cameras, a place rebuilt into a fortress that admitted its fear. Mrs. Delgado met us at the door with a blanket and steady eyes, as if terror was just another mess to manage. I let her wrap my shoulders and felt the baby settle, a small internal reminder that I was still carrying life. Inside, reinforced windows gleamed, and guards checked corners with quiet routine. I wanted to collapse, but my mind stayed on June and Lily, praying Ilir could not reach them. In the master suite, Nico finally let the mask slip. His shoulders sagged, and his hands trembled before he forced them still. I saw guilt in him, the knowledge that his war had spilled into strangers' lives. I stepped close and held his forearm, not to turn this into romance, but to keep him anchored. I needed him steady for the baby, for Lily, for my mother. He leaned his forehead to my hair, breathing hard. I stayed because partnership meant sharing fear, not pretending it away. Outside, guards paced and footsteps sounded like a countdown we could not ignore. Later, Nico's focus returned, colder than before. He tightened security and I sensed the shift from defense to offense. He intended to hunt Ilir, not wait for another strike. My instinct was to beg for hiding, but Lily's face stopped me. June's porch and the baby's heartbeat reminded me that running only moves the target. I needed this to end. I made it clear, in my own steady way, that I would not be shut out of planning again. If my children were the stakes, I had earned a voice. Exhaustion dragged, and a public event flashed, planting a trap. The Bainbridge mansion stopped feeling like a house and started feeling like a schedule. Guards shifted posts at the same minutes every day. Doors clicked, cameras blinked, meals appeared, and silence filled the gaps. I learned to measure time by Lily's drawings arriving in sealed envelopes and by the baby's slow turning inside me. Waiting changed me. On the surface, I looked calmer, even polite. Underneath, I was sharpening, the way a mother animal does when the den is threatened. 3 days after the bombing, a name I had never heard reached Nico through back channels. Caleb Ward. He wasn't one of Nico's men. He belonged to Ilyr's orbit, an intermediary who had grown tired of carrying messages that ended in bodies. I never saw him up close, only the way Nico listened, expression hard, while the man begged for protection. It shocked me that fear could fracture an enemy from the inside, that loyalty could rot when the cost got too high. Caleb's information came in pieces, Nico verified, then repeated to me in the simplest terms. Ilyr had moved again, away from the last waterfront base we'd traced, deeper into an industrial stretch near the harbor where warehouses sat like blank teeth. He was planning another strike within 3 to 4 days. Something meant to erase this fortress and everyone in it. No ransom, no warning, just impact. Hearing that, I pictured June's hands and Lily's sleeping face, and the baby's heartbeat turned into a countdown. Nico and his people could have stormed any building on paper, but paper didn't account for chaos. A direct assault on Ilyr's new hideout would be costly and uncertain. And even if it worked, it would invite a wider war in a city full of ordinary families. Nico paced the study while maps and phone calls piled up. I watched him and realized he was trapped too, by pride, by responsibility, by the simple fact that Ilyr would keep striking until he chose the moment. That was when my old email surfaced on the tablet Eli monitored, a calendar reminder from months ago, the Seattle Aquarium Conservation Gala. Before my life burned down, I had agreed to speak about rehab work and coastal wildlife rescue. The event was public, bright, full of donors and cameras, but also full of corridors and quiet corners. If Ilyr believed I had reappeared, visibly pregnant, he would read it as arrogance or weakness. Either way, he would come for the leverage he thought he owned. I hated myself for how clear the idea felt. I was terrified of stepping into any crowd again, terrified of being the reason someone else screamed. But I was more terrified of raising Lily in permanent hiding, teaching her that love means running, and that danger always wins. I thought of her coloring turtles while strangers drew circles around her life. I could keep running and let Ilyr choose the next bombing, or I could help end the chase on our terms. Nico's first response was pure refusal, written in his posture before any words could form. He had spent weeks turning me into the most protected person in his world, and I was proposing to walk into light. I didn't soften. I watched his resistance shift into reluctant respect as he weighed psychology against instinct. When he finally agreed, it came with conditions I accepted without argument: discreet protection, a clear exit plan, and Dr. Foster's medical clearance. He needed control. I needed a choice. Dr. Foster came the next morning with her calm bag and her serious eyes. She took my blood pressure and didn't hide her concern. Stress was climbing. She warned in the gentle way doctors do when they know you will ignore them. She wanted rest, quiet, fewer spikes of adrenaline. I wanted a future where my children could rest too. I promised her I would be careful, knowing care is not the same as safety, and that motherhood sometimes means choosing the least terrible option. The days before the gala blurred into rehearsal and dread. I practiced my conservation talk in the mirror, smoothing my voice until it sounded normal, even as my hands hovered over my belly like a shield. Mrs. Delgado adjusted my dress fittings with brisk kindness, and Nico's people checked routes and schedules I wasn't allowed to know. I reread Lily's note and forced myself to imagine her older, telling her friends her mom finally stopped running. The lie I repeated was simple: I can do hard things. On gala night, I stood in an emerald gown that hid a thin vest beneath its flow, hair pinned back, lips steady. The car dropped me at the aquarium entrance, and warm September air smelled faintly of seaweed and champagne. Inside, blue light rippled across marble floors, turning everyone into moving shadows. Fish drifted behind glass like silent witnesses. My heartbeat thudded in my ears, the baby stirring once as if to remind me I was not alone. I felt eyes on me before I saw anyone, and I kept walking anyway, breathing. Night inside the aquarium felt like stepping underwater, fully dressed. Blue light washed over marble, and every face looked borrowed, half shadow, half reflection. Schools of fish slid behind glass, silent and calm, while my pulse kept time in my throat. The emerald gown draped over my belly, and the thin vest beneath it reminded me that courage sometimes comes stitched. I pressed a hand to my bump as the baby shifted, a small nudge that said, "Keep breathing." I pictured Lily at June's house, missing a tooth and clutching her rabbit, and I let that image anchor me. This was why I had walked into the open. Around me, donors laughed softly, waiters floated with trays, and the building hummed with normal life that did not know my name. I moved toward the stage, counting steps, listening for the shift in air that meant a predator had entered story. When the microphone touched my palm, my voice surprised me by sounding steady. I spoke about rescue work, about sea lions wrapped in fishing line, about how protecting a creature means seeing it before it disappears. Applause rose and fell like waves, and I smiled on instinct, performing normal while my eyes searched exits and corners. I noticed familiar shapes in the crowd, not faces, but postures. A waiter who never looked at the trays, a couple who did not drink, a staff member who watched the hallway more than the tank. Nico's people, disguised as ordinary, gave me a thin sense of safety and a thick sense of anger. No one should need this to attend a fundraiser. Between questions, the baby rolled again, and I breathed through it, reminding myself that I was here to end the chase. If Ilir was watching, I wanted him to believe me. The shift arrived before the man did. Laughter thinned, as if oxygen had been siphoned from the room, and the hair on my arms lifted. I turned slightly and felt eyes land on my back with deliberate weight. Ilir Kreshnik moved through the crowd like a rumor, older than I expected, face carved hard, suit too neat for someone who lived in warehouses. 2 men hovered near him, watching me instead of the tanks. He did not rush, because he did not need to. I let my smile stay in place and began walking, guiding myself toward the deep ocean exhibit where the light dimmed and voices softened. The tank rose like a column of midnight water, sharks and rays circling with slow certainty. My mind stayed clear, but my body screamed to run. I kept going, thinking of Lily's small hand in mine. The baby fluttered, steadying my spine. Ilir closed the distance in the dim glow, blocking my path back to the crowd, his attention fixed on my belly, and I understood his belief that I was the handle on Nico's life. He tried to herd me with quiet menace, promising harm without raising his voice. My fear spiked, then settled into cold refusal. I would not vanish again, and I would not let this child enter the world as anyone's bargaining chip. Behind him, shadows shifted as Nico arrived, and the air tightened like a net. Ilir's men were pulled away into side corridors before they could spark panic, and the exhibit stayed eerily calm, fish gliding past glass while my heart hammered. Ilir realized too late that tonight's darkness was not his. When he was restrained, he left a warning about blood and legacy. I answered inside myself with a mother's truth. Love can outlast fear. We moved through corridors that smelled of bleach and coats, away from the ballroom and its donors. My knees shook as adrenaline drained, and I fought the urge to fold onto the floor. Nico stayed close, not touching unless necessary, his presence a line beside me. Upstairs, music resumed, as if the building refused to admit what happened near the deep tank. Outside, night air tasted of salt and exhaust. In the vehicle, I let my head rest back and listened to my breathing until it slowed. Relief spread through me, real and heavy, but it did not feel like an ending. Ilir was contained, yet my life still held loose threads. Grant's bewildered face, my first wedding destroyed, Lily's questions waiting at June's table, and the baby's future still unwritten. City lights streaked past. Surviving the trap was only step 1. Now I had to choose what came next. Back at the mansion, Mrs. Delgado met us with tea and a look that said she had been praying. I held the cup, letting the tremor in my fingers fade. Nico moved through the house checking on people, the night carving lines into his face. The main threat was neutralized, but the aftermath waited. Investigations, rumors, and the questions Lily would ask when she saw me again. I pictured her staring at my belly, trying to understand why her mom disappeared and returned changed. I also thought of Grant, still living in the wreckage of a wedding he never finished. I could not build a future on untold truth. When I lay down, the baby kicked once, firm and impatient, as if demanding I choose. I stared into the dark and understood what family meant now. It was not a label. It was a decision we had to make soon. The night after the aquarium, I lay in the quiet guest room at the mansion and listened for sirens that never came. My body kept expecting the world to shake again. But the only rhythm was the tide beyond the trees and the baby rolling under my ribs. Relief did not feel like celebration. It felt like a bruise finally getting air. Ilir was contained, Nico's people said, and the city would keep spinning. Still, I woke at dawn with my hands on my belly, thinking of Lily's school backpack and June's tired smile. The danger was smaller, not gone, and I knew I could not build a future on unfinished truths. 2 days later, I met Grant Holloway in a cafe near the ferry terminal, a place full of students and laptops and ordinary conversations. Nico stayed out of sight, but I could feel the weight of protection in the room anyway. Grant looked thinner, like he had been living on coffee and sleepless nights. His eyes went to my stomach first, then to my face, and I watched him put the pieces together without needing to hear a word. In my head, I told him everything I could not say on that rooftop. I told him I had chosen him because he was safe, because Lily deserved stability, because I was tired of chaos. I told him that what we had built was responsible, not passionate, and that I had mistaken responsibility for love. I gave him the truth gently, the way you release a bird with a healed wing. He deserved to be fully chosen by someone who wanted him, not by someone who needed an escape hatch. Grant did not fight me. He absorbed the loss with a quiet dignity that made my throat burn. In the end, I felt gratitude more than guilt. He had offered me a calm life. I had offered him a version of myself that was already braced for disaster. When we parted, I felt a door close without slamming. That evening, Nico found me on the back patio, wrapped in a cardigan, watching the water turn gold. He did not try to soften what had happened between us. He knew he had taken me without consent, and no happy ending could erase that. What he could do, what he was doing, was giving me choices now, even when it scared him. He placed a small velvet box on the table like it was a contract and a confession in one. He wanted a real marriage, not a claim made in gunfire, but a promise built on consent, boundaries, and our children. I stared at the ring until my eyes blurred. I was afraid of trusting happiness, afraid that loving him meant excusing the worst parts of our beginning. Then I thought of the heartbeat, of Lily's tooth taped to the fridge, of June shielding my daughter while I was gone. Love, I realized, was not the origin story. Love was what you chose after the damage. I said yes because I wanted a family that told the truth, even about its scars. We kept the wedding small. 30 people, no cameras, no strangers, just those who had carried us through the storm. June walked Lily down the garden path first, her little dress swishing as she scattered petals with serious concentration. Mrs. Delgado fixed my veil and kissed my cheek like an aunt who had seen too much and still believed in joy. Nico stood under an arch of roses with his hands clasped, looking more nervous than he ever had in a gunfight. When it was my turn, I moved slowly, one hand on my belly, the other in June's. I did not pretend my path to that moment was romantic. I let myself remember fear, the locked doors, the nights I cried quietly so Lily would not hear it. I also remembered the moments Nico stepped back and let me decide, the way he kept his word about innocence, the way he listened when I demanded purpose. In my heart, I promised him partnership, not obedience, and I promised our children a home where love meant safety and accountability. A few weeks later, at 3 a.m, contractions woke me like a tide pulling hard. The drive to the hospital was a blur of streetlights and breathing. Nico stayed at my side, steady and quiet, letting me squeeze his hand and curse the universe in my head. Labor stripped me down to endurance, then rebuilt me into something fiercer. When Theo James Marino finally arrived, slick and loud and perfect, they laid him on my chest, and the world narrowed to his tiny weight. Nico touched our son's fist with a trembling finger and looked like a man learning how to hope. 6 months passed. Lily learned to hold Theo's bottle with both hands, whispering secret stories to him as if he understood every word. June sat in the rocking chair, tears sliding down her cheeks while she watched her granddaughter become a sister. I reopened my work in a marine rehab space near the water, treating injured seabirds and volunteering with rescue teams. Nico shifted more of his business into legitimate shipping contracts, the kind that came with paperwork instead of threats. Security still existed, but it no longer defined every hour. Sometimes I thought back to the rooftop at the Rainier Grand, to the moment engines cut through my vows and my life shattered. I do not romanticize that day. Losing choice is a wound, even when you survive it. The paradox is that the wreckage forced me to see what I truly needed: truth, boundaries, and the courage to protect my children with more than fear. If life has rewritten you, tell me in the comments what helped you stand back up. And if this story stayed with you, like and share it, and let me know what kind of story you want next.